Hi, welcome to another edition of Green TV. I am your host, Betsy Rosenberg, your happy host. And even though I'm always excited to interview all of my guests, this one is particularly close to my heart because Kristy Drutman is someone who just came from Glasgow. That's the reason for this particular interview. She was at COP in a couple of different roles. We'll talk about that. But I met Kristy when she came up to me after I raised my hand at a Bioneers conference. I asked a question about media and I don't remember what it was. She might. And she came up and introduced herself and she ended up becoming my intern. And it was such a wonderful experience for me. I hope for her as well. Happened to be a student at Cal, which is my alma mater. And here she is now. She's a podcast host. She's very much an activist. And you got to go to COP26 and I didn't. So I'm a little green with envy, but Brown Girl Green is the name of your podcast. And welcome to the show. And if I can just say, I love, you're from the Philippines, if I remember correctly, and you're half Filipino, half Jewish. I love that part of you, both parts of you, all parts of you. So this is going to be a fun interview, but obviously touching on very serious topics. So welcome to the Green TV.
Thank you so much. And the question that you did ask was, you're just really frustrated that like mainstream media channels, like all these mainstream news channels were not covering climate at the rate that they need to be. And you were like, where are the TV show hosts actually covering this issue? And that was something that I felt also really passionate about. And that's why I created Brown Girl Green, was for that particular reason as well. So I'm really happy to be here and to see my mentor on screen doing her project.
My mentee, thank you. So, and I'm always the one asking that question. I have been for over 20 years at all these climate conferences, green conferences, and people usually look at me cross-eyed, people on the panel, but then other people who get it, like you, come up and say, yeah, I've been wondering the same thing. If it's the existential crisis of our time, where's the TV show? Well, here it is, Green TV. If you can't get them to see the light, then start your own. So very excited to have you. You have been working, I know, very much in the activism part of climate, and it's where climate intersects with environmental justice and equity and all those good things that are so important that my generation of environmentalists didn't quite see it that way. So in that role and others, you went off to Glasgow, and fresh from Scotland. Tell us how it was for you. I know there's certainly disappointments, but just in terms of, I don't know how much you traveled internationally, but it must have been exciting to be there.
Yeah, so I was actually in the UK for several weeks because I also attended TED Countdown, which was TEDx's first initiative to really talk about climate change through their platforms as well. So it was a whole, couple of weeks of exploring the intersections between climate, art, media, all of the above. And, attending Glasgow and going to COP26 was this really whirlwind experience. I actually went to COP24 in Poland. And so it wasn't my first COP, but I went into this COP with like a intention of like, I really want to see like what's happening on the ground, to do interesting storytelling. And it was just a disaster. Like there was thousands of military men everywhere waiting for people who were going to protest. The way you had to enter in was through these little metal turnstiles, which I actually ended up scraping my ankle on. It felt like you were just in a military base camp. It was just like really intense. And like a lot of people this year didn't get badges, especially because of COVID, because a lot of different countries don't have vaccines or like have access to vaccines. And so if you weren't vaccinated, you weren't allowed to enter the venue. And so that automatically eliminated a good amount of the world population from being able to attend this event. On top of that, like it's so expensive to have even stayed in the area because there's such limited housing. It was almost impossible for people to find a place to stay. So I would say this was like the most inaccessible conference I've ever been to in my life. And especially even for people with disabilities, like you would have to go from one venue to another venue that was like 20 minutes away, maybe like a 20-minute walk or something. And I was just really frustrated logistically with how the conference was planned. It was just awful.
And yet this has been billed as the make or break. Like this is the last chance. And that's not, it's not hyping it up by saying that with the Code Red for Humanity call just a few months ago. So that's really too bad that they were keeping people out and suppressed rather than, I mean, climate protesters, I'm sorry, they are not a violent crowd. So what were they so concerned about? do you think?
I feel like maybe because there are so many world leaders, like Obama was there, Al Gore, John Kerry, I think they were just worried that like maybe there would be some sort of like, security threat. But it just felt so like extreme, because even after those world leaders left, it was like there's still such extreme security. And then I would say inside the conference, like there was a green zone and a blue zone. And I'd say like the green zone was a lot of companies kind of just like trying to tout that they're doing the best job for the environment. There was no mention around fossil fuels. There was no mention around the need to phase out fossil fuels. Even in the final language of COP26, they say phase down fossil fuels like coal, not phase out. So we already, like it's so much greenwashing. And then when I was in the blue zone, which is, where the more official people get access to, again, it was just like countries also promoting that they're doing net zero, like they're going to zero out their emissions. But that, again, they don't actually spell out how they're going to do that. They don't have any talk about actually getting rid of fossil fuels. So again, it makes you think, okay, it's great you have these ambitious plans, but if you don't have any like policy or actual action to back it up, how are people supposed to believe that that's going to actually happen in the next 10, 20 years? So there was a lot of that going on, a lot of people taking pictures. It was very much a big PR circus is what I like to say COP is. And there's young people outside of the conference that couldn't even get a badge who were, marching and hosting conversations because we're just very frustrated with it because we aren't in those rooms, but yet we do have opinions about it. And I think our opinions are just as valid as, these policymakers who do get this access. So yeah.
They're more valid because you are the ones, your generation and behind you who are going to live with the worst of this. And yet my generation has pretty much screwed it up. Because why do I say that? Because, we didn't know about it, let's say prior to 20, maybe 30 years ago, if you count Dr. James Hansen testifying in front of Congress, which certainly the world should have woken up then, right? But certainly the last 2 decades, there's no excuse for not understanding what's happening. And yet it's been now the sense is, in my generation that we should hand it over to you guys. You get it, you'll take care of it. And that's so not the right attitude. And
yeah. And I was going to say like, it's not even the right attitude because like, we're not even allowed in the negotiation rooms. And so it's like, how is it up to us? And when we don't even get a say when it comes down to the actual writing of these international agreements. So
let alone voting. I don't know how old you have to be to vote, like in Sweden, where I think Greta is from Sweden, that you don't have your rights yet. And even when you do, you should have a few years to establish yourself in your careers. And I hope that many of you will put, as you did, a green twist or a twist of lime, as I say, on whatever it is you're interested in your case, journalism and ethics and those issues. So important, but you shouldn't have to have the burden of the world on your shoulders right out of college, if not before.
Exactly.
And yet here we are. So you went there not just to observe, but also to present. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I was a speaker in both the green zone and the blue zone, which I was really privileged to have access to both spaces. But both were at the intersections of art, climate, and storytelling, which is kind of the antithesis of what these climate spaces are like, because they're very policy and technical and science. Yeah, sciencey. And there's not really space for like art and expression. So the fact that I was in these very like niche pockets was already curating a very unique experience for me at COP. But both talks really centered on what is the role of an artist, whether you be a filmmaker, whether you be a poet, a painter in the climate fight. And what we're realizing more and more is that the science has hit a wall. That the science is clear. Climate scientists have rang the alarms time and time again. But again, it's like, who is listening? And that means there needs to be a culture shift. And so people kind of underestimate that, where they're like, no, the science and the policy is enough. Clearly it's not, because we are seeing how much of a failure this COP was. in terms of getting actual ambitious goals on the table. So it's like there needs to be a role for cultural shifts and for artists to have a space to start teaching people that it's important that they wake up and care about these issues, and not just care about it, that they have the power to influence policy change and things like that. And so, yeah, I thought both of those talks were really interesting. I was definitely positioned as like more of like a young creative who's more new in this space, making content and trying to do that culture shift work. Whereas the older folks were like documentary filmmakers, or, have won X, Y, and Z award because they were pretty established in their careers. So it was really interesting to explore like, how could older folks also help this like newer generation like myself who want to do climate storytelling? How can we work together so that way people of all ages are included in this conversation?
So was there a designated section devoted to climate art and the arts? Is that how you got
there's
blue zone? How did you get into the blue zone? I'm so proud of you.
Yeah. So basically, like, it wasn't really a dedicated thing. It was like a panel that got arranged by a fellow colleague of mine who's very connected to the UN, and like the UN. I don't want to get the acronym wrong, but it's the UN University. And they have a climate arts program that they're launching. And they actually made a video series about youth artists from around the world doing climate art. And so the point of the panel was to premiere that and to talk about what kind of impact that kind of storytelling has or can have on the climate conversation. And so they felt like I would be a perfect fit, since a lot of my work is thinking about how do we modify or rethink the climate storytelling conversation to reach more people through a creative lens.
And what was the response?
I would say that, a lot of people walked up to me and said that they thought what I'm doing is really interesting, that like they didn't really think about their role as a storyteller, and now they were like, hey, maybe I could have my own platform or make my own piece of art or poetry to talk about climate. So that was kind of the reception that I got from some people. But I think on the other hand, there was a young woman who went to the microphone and said, a lot of content creation in terms of like maybe what these big foundations or news channels do, they have really fancy equipment, they have tons of money and connections. How is a young person supposed to tap into that? And to that, I responded and I said, we have smartphones. If you do have access to that, you have friends, you have text message groups. Like there's definitely opportunities. Like don't limit yourself just because you don't have like the big fancy equipment to make a top selling environmental documentary. Like we don't need that. We don't need the most polished content anymore. We need quantity, not just quality. And I think that that's like the direction content needs to go in for climate storytelling.
Especially fresh content. I'm a news gal, so of course I always want to get the latest and greatest.
Exactly.
And as being on a mainstream platform, CBS radio for so many years, tried to bring environmental news in and make it just as important. And I'd call in from the zero waste conferences or zero emissions and say, hey, there's this new technology. And my newsroom was like, Betsy, why are you treating it like it's a breaking story? I said, because the planet is breaking. So I really did that starting with Trash Talk back in 1997. And that's what's important is there's wonderful documentaries, and more of them are getting funded, thank goodness, but they're seen by the Green Choir. God bless the choir, but we need to go beyond, of course. But then they sit on shelves, so to speak, and they get dated. The problems are still there, certainly, but it gets older. And, I just love that ability now with the technology and equipment, and your generation not being afraid to use it, to say this is what's happening today. And there was a lot on COP TV that I tried to catch. Tell us about the unofficial events, like in the evening. What was the most interesting thing you went to? Who did you meet? Was it mostly Americans or people from other country? Did they all speak English? Did you make friends and contacts going forward?
Yeah, I made so many friends from around the world in the past few weeks. I would say one of the coolest like offline events, or like out of the COP space event that I had, was I actually hosted like an in real life meetup with people who follow me on the internet. And we had 2 events. So we had one where we actually met up other young people to attend the climate march that happened on that Friday. And that was super fun. And that was people from all different countries around the world. And then we also hosted a dinner the second week of COP. And again, like it was all people from different countries and communities who follow me on social media, but had maybe never met each other. And now they're all friends. And that was really cool. So I'd say like, for me personally, maybe it's a little like, whatever, self-serving, but I thought that was very cool. I'd say the other thing that had nothing to do with me was a really incredible event hosted by an Indigenous group called NDN Collective. And it was all about Indigenous wisdom and that we need to listen to Indigenous peoples at this time moving forward about what we're going to do about climate change. Again, it goes back to this whole principle that like we do have the tools to address the climate crisis because we used to live in harmony with nature, Indigenous people in particular. So it's not really this big mystery, but it's about like, are we as a society willing to listen to Indigenous leadership and actually have our framework guide and unlearn, all this destruction that has been caused. So I thought that was another really profound event that I got to attend.
And while there is much more attention properly focused now on Indigenous communities and their wisdom, and yet I can imagine why they must have been disappointed, maybe depressed, maybe even despairing leaving, as well as representatives from island nations like the Maldives and Tuvalu and those that just said, we're sinking literally right now. And, your net zero 2050 or even 2030 goals are not going to help us, not nearly enough.
Yeah.
Was that the mood? Was there anger towards the end, especially when India snuck in there and made a very slight semantics change, but significant from phase out to phase down?
Yes, exactly. Actually, another event that hasn't been publicized enough, but I'm actually making a video about it literally today. A bunch of young people came together to try to gather signatures from tons of countries from around the world to get thousands of signatures to talk about how young people were disappointed in how COP26 turned out. There's an article now in the Washington Post that came out a few days ago about it. And a friend of mine, she's from Panama, she's has a climate vulnerable community, and they decided the International Youth Coalition is what we called it on a WhatsApp group. We decided that because she actually is a party negotiator. So she was actually inside those rooms and she's 25. So she's like basically my age. And so we decided, since she had that position of both being a young person, but also getting access to the inside game, that she would deliver these like closing remarks by young people that we were like really angry about how COP26 turned out. And so she delivered this powerful speech talking about how these goals were not ambitious enough and that it failed, our generation and especially people who live on the front lines of climate change. And I highly recommend people check out her speech. Her name's Marie. There was a post that just came up about it. So I would say that like overall, like people walked away very upset, but they were not silent. And I think that made a big difference because I think that leaders are starting to finally wake up and recognize how ashamed of them that the general public is. And for some reason, it took 26 years for it to get to this point. But I feel like that was the one thing that was interesting this year, that I heard more world leaders on Twitter or like whatever express their disappointment. I've not seen that in previous years, which was interesting and hopeful. I hope.
And that's because the alarm level is appropriately has risen. And yet the last 2 decades were basically wasted, which is, a crime against humanity. I don't have to tell you that. What did it feel like to be in the marches? I know you had wind and rain and it was cold, so it wasn't fun, but maybe it was empowering.
What's funny is actually the march that I like mostly attended that first day was completely sunny, which was funny. So there was 2. There was like the Friday and then there's a Saturday event. The Friday event was actually like very sunny and nice, which was kind of funny because we were all like, wow, the sun came out just for like us to do this. And it was just one of those funny things where everyone here was like, these climate talks have been around longer than I've been alive. And then there's also like this thing where older folks in even the climate space can be like, I've been doing this work for like 20, 30 years. You young people don't know what you're talking about.
I wouldn't say that.
Yeah, but then it's just like, or they don't agree with like marches or protesting, but it's like, but at the same time, like, we didn't choose to be born into this, and we're just having to deal with it. So we're going to do it the way we're going to do it.
And look where you've gotten us, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, look where your ways didn't work. Like, we're marching in the streets because what should have happened has not happened, and it's kind of too little too late, and yet we can't give up. So I know about 8 years ago, the Philippines was hit by a typhoon. I was covering that, and I remember how, well, so often the media will focus on an event, extreme weather event, there's so many, while it's happening, and maybe a day or two after, and then they leave. And these island nations or countries or whole communities that have been leveled, like when hurricanes go through, tornadoes go through, cyclones go through, and they've lost everything. And it's happened in so many places I can't even count. So because you're from there, tell us what it's like 8 years later, and how long it has taken to get the resources needed to rebuild, start again. And then what about when the next one comes through?
Yeah, so for clarification, my family's from there. I'm not from the Philippines. So my mom is from the Philippines, but I would say that, like, for me, knowing that like my family members still live out there, and that like it is a climate vulnerable country, one of, definitely up on the list. It for me was my wake up moment to realizing and caring about climate change when I was in college. It was actually like largely because of this. And there's a man named Yabsano who actually went on a hunger strike for the COP that happened back then. I don't know what number that was.
Wow.
COP26. So I don't even know what number it was at that point. But it was that year, and because of what had happened, he went on a hunger strike during those climate negotiations. That was the first time I even knew what COP was. And UC Berkeley students, I didn't participate in it because I was just learning about what was happening, participated in the hunger strike with him in solidarity. And it was just this whole visceral moment of like, wow, like people are literally like going to die because of climate change, and have died because of climate change, and people who look like my family or come from communities just like my family. And so that was a really big wake-up call for me. And at COP26, I got to actually meet some survivors who actually came all the way from the Philippines to go to COP to spread the message that it's been 8 years and we really haven't seen much progress, and there's going to be so many more typhoons that hit us moving forward. And to again have that experience while at COP and being like, wow, it's the 8 year anniversary and here we are. It was really disappointing. It really made it finally sink deeper about how much of a failure our leaders have been to actually address this at the rate that they need to.
Yeah, your worlds came together. And are they able to build back better, to coin a phrase that's out there? Do they have the resources? So assuming that we're going to have more and they're going to be worse, is that happening at all, or is it not fundable?
Yeah, it depends on the region, but definitely like after that typhoon, like there was a lot of nonprofit aid work. There's still a lot of aid work to try to support those communities. I would say that they're in a bit more of a stable place, but typhoons are hitting the Philippines all the time. Certain communities are definitely getting prepped more than others. And there's actually a young group led by young people. Again, it comes back to young people, called Kids for Kids PH or Philippines, that actually have come together to like fundraise and to try to pressure the government to take climate change more seriously. And it's all led by very young people, teenagers, like young people that just care about this issue. And I'm realizing more and more that like countries like the Philippines and other countries on the front lines of the climate crisis deserve support from Western nations or countries that have the resources. And that was another big failure at COP26, was the lack of funding for loss and damage. There was supposed to be billions of dollars that were put into a fund that was supposed to go towards providing infrastructure and support for countries in countries like the Philippines or other island nations to be able to have that infrastructure. And they did not meet their commitments again in that category.
Again, that it is terrible. And people your age. I have a daughter your age, very close, and I hope to have grandchildren. So that's why I don't understand why baby boomers, we love you guys, our children, and some are having grandchildren already, more than life itself. Why is that not a motivator? I mean, some, yes, there's very many who are active, but too many are not. It's like there's next generations, people you are in love with, your kin, you'd think, right? Especially because things have happened so much faster than even the climate scientists had predicted in terms of the damage. So we just have a couple more minutes. So tell us a little bit about your podcast and what you focus on there.
Yeah. So, Brown Girl Green is a multimedia platform. So I do podcasts, videos, interviews, the whole gambit. And a lot of my work is focused on environmental advocacy, but specifically like being a brown girl. So I talk about my own cultural experiences, upbringings, the ways in which I feel like environmental messaging or storytelling has not been the most accessible to more people. So I try to address social justice, equity issues, try to give people history and resources so they understand like why we're in the moment we're in when it comes to climate change, and that they actually have things they can do about it. And, organizations or companies that are trying their best to try to solve these issues. And I try my best to kind of be a signal booster or a bridge as an online platform to provide that as a online resource hub for people.
And where can they find your podcast? And
you can, yeah. So people can subscribe to the Brown Girl Green podcast, follow me at Brown Girl Green on all social media platforms, or check out my website, browngirlgreen.org.
Well, we will definitely post a link on our website, on Green TV, of course, YouTube. I hope you'll tell people about us, because we are here to bring these messages out, because if the greater public doesn't know about these things, it's just us talking to us, which is not going to do it. So thank you for getting it. Thank you for doing so well out of college. My goodness, you've been to 2 COPs and you're 25. I was going to go, but I ended up hurting my hand really bad. I took my cast off for this interview, and I just had to be home for physical therapy, but maybe next year, I hope. And just thanks for joining us. Thanks for taking time, Kristy. And I will check in. I listened to a couple of your podcasts a while ago, but it's time to go back, because you're right on the front lines, and you do it with a smile, and you do it with legitimate anger as well. Not everybody can do that.
Thank you so much, Betsy. Thank you, everyone.
And that does it for this edition of Green TV. I want to say special thanks to Chris Weiss, who is our tech person. She takes these interviews and turns them around and makes them into TV and posts them for us, and also in social media. And we just want to again invite you to tell your friends, please subscribe. The more subscribers we get, the sooner we can start live streaming and expand our programming. We hope to go 24/7, and like the climate crisis, there's no time to waste. Thanks so much. See you next time.